I'm going to go live now. All
Yeah.
right. Stand by. Stand by, everybody. So good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Grace Telesco, and we are live streaming on a YouTube channel for Fishler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. I am joined by my regular guest, my monthly regular guest, my friend, Ed Dentzel. He is the host of Unfound. Those of you who know him and have heard him and have listened to his presentations over the, I want to say years. Am I right, Ed?
Well, the podcast is coming up on its 6-year anniversary, but you and I have actually been doing this for over 2 years now.
2 years. That's awesome. That is so awesome. And the really great news that we have is that Ed is going to be coming, I believe it's September 22nd. Am I right?
That's right. Yes.
To Fort Lauderdale. We're going to do the live show from my office on campus in Fort Lauderdale. Ed is going to be sitting right next to me. It'll be a one-of-a-kind kind of thing because Ed lives on the West Coast. And of course, you know, our NSU campus is located on the East Coast. That's where our main campus is. And so he's going to be coming to speak to my class. I'm going to be teaching an intro to criminal justice class in the fall. And he's going to come and speak to the class. And then at night, then we're going to go have lunch, probably go have lunch somewhere nice. And then after that at night, we have our show and we'll be together in, he's actually, Ed has been on campus last year. He spoke to a group of our undergrads last year. And so he did have an occasion to see my office. So,
it's an awesome office, much better than my own. I mean, it's not even close. All the memorabilia and books and everything. So it's fascinating. Everything.
It's cool. It's cool. But I see that you're sporting some kind of is that a game back there?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Like
I have a couple of video games. I'm really not a video game person, but it's kind of just to create like kind of a feel, kind of an atmosphere here in my bachelor pad in Clearwater Beach, Florida. Those are a couple. It's Pac-Man and Street Fighter 2 next to each other in the background.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it. So for those who don't know about Ed, because Ed has a fantastic following. He's on Spotify. He's on YouTube. He does his podcast every single week. And he has a great fan base. So the fan base knows him, but maybe some of our students or faculty or staff from NSU don't know who Ed is. But Ed is an actor, screenwriter, filmmaker, journalist, and dedicates his entire life and existence now to two major things. May I say?
Yeah. Just so you say missing persons first. Yes.
Of course. So missing persons cases, and that's why he calls it Unfound. He calls the show Unfound because what we look at is our cold cases where the victim is still missing. And tonight is a very special one. Over 30 years, this woman is missing. And Ed is going to give us all of the facts. But the other great thing about Ed, if you don't know, not only is he all those things that I said, but his life is dedicated to Unfound and missing persons. And then his hobby is he is a Frisbee golf player.
Disc golf, yes.
Disc golf.
Yes.
Excuse me.
That's all right. That's all right.
All right. So Ed, without any further ado, I know we have a lot to discuss tonight, so I'm just going to stop the spotlight on me right now and just go right to you.
All right, great. It's great to be here again. I think I say this every time, and I think I've been saying this since, the first episodes we did of your show going back a couple years. The time flies so fast. It seems like we were, just doing this like yesterday, but it had been a month since you and I got together last. And I surely cannot believe that it's been over 2 years since we first did a show together. And it all got started because I wanted to come down to speak at Nova Southeastern University back in, I think, April of 2020. Then COVID hit, and we had to push that off the whole way to November of 2021. But dare I say that it was well worth it to come down there and speak to your students on such a fantastic classroom and everything. Had a great showing for that and getting to know some of your students and then going to lunch afterwards. And I look forward to being back down there. You were right, September 22nd for both the speaking engagement and the live show we're going to do together. Just doesn't seem like it's possible that it's been over 2 years since you and I were introduced to each other, actually through an assistant of mine who doesn't even work with me or for me anymore. She parted on good company. Natasha and I still talk once in a while. But she was the one who first contacted you, really, because she lives in that area where the school is. So right. That's how it first happened. And I cannot thank her enough for reaching out to you. And then, of course, you responding. And it's been great ever since. So I really appreciate it.
It's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, it's good. Yes, it is. It's good. And we follow each other. You follow my disc golf and I follow your love of animals. And I see you've been riding horses lately, which is really cool. Yes. Tonight we're going to be discussing the disappearance of Julie Weflin. And this is a disappearance that I wanted to cover way back in like 2017, but the guest, his name is John Polos, would not do an official interview with me because of something that we'll get into once we start talking about the disappearance itself. And then, so I became very, very, very familiar with it. And then I had to put it on the back burner because the guy who knew the most about it was not willing to talk about it publicly, at least not at that time. But then things changed in 2020. He came on to Unfound. I think it was either in April or May of 2020. So over 2 years ago is when John Polos, very good guy, amateur investigator, actually did solve another disappearance in 2009, which got him involved in trying to solve Julie's. But this is an episode that was originally titled The Women's Reject, which is kind of a play on the book or movie called The Devil's Rejects. And the title of it, you'll see once we get into some of the particulars of this disappearance. It's something that we have to think about as a theory regarding Julie's disappearance. As I mentioned, John Polos was the guest, and he was a friend of Julie's, and in fact, he was a co-worker of hers at the time. And that's important because she disappeared while on the job, and I'll get into that in a moment. As everybody knows who has watched this show before, and maybe even the Unfound Now shows that I do monthly regarding recent disappearances, I always like to come to any show like this kind of monthly show with some ideas, like some learning points, you might say. And the three that I will get into deeper later is number one, the problem of coincidence in relation to disappearances. Number two is called when it's obvious. And number three, people can't help themselves. And I will come back to those when I'm done talking about the facts and everything that's gone on since 1987 regarding the disappearance of Julie Weflin. As Dr. Telesco has posted there, she was 28 years old. She disappeared on September 16th, 1987. And the location was outside of Spokane, Washington. It's kind of a little bit out in the middle of nowhere. So it's technically, I think, some other address, but that's the best we could do. And you're going to be seeing a satellite map very shortly. We don't need to show it right at this point, but you'll be seeing exactly where she disappeared. And then you'll kind of understand why we just say outside of Spokane, Washington. So the facts are these. Julie Weflin was a power company worker, and it was called the Bonneville Power Company. And so technically she was a federal employee, and she was one of the few women working in the field for this company at that time in the late 1980s. So she was unique in her position. Of course, we maybe know in 2022, of course, it's much more common, but she was the type of person that would go out to remote power stations or lines to check and see if things are okay. If there's any problems, she'd go out to see what's going on. She could fix these things herself if she needed to. Sometimes, of course, you need more than one person, but she was a very capable young woman. She was married, but she had no children. Like I said, she was 28 years old. And at the time of her disappearance, she had at least been working for the power company for at least a few years. And by all counts, she was well liked, she was well respected. And as far as we could tell, had she not disappeared, she would probably continued having this job for as long as she wanted it. So on this particular day, on September 16th, 1987, there was an alert that popped up that something was going on at a particular power station out in the country to the west of Spokane, Washington. And it really technically was not her area. But being that was going to be on her way home, she said, you know what, that's on my way home. I'll check it out. We'll see what's going on. I'll have all my equipment there. If it's something that I can fix, great. If it's not, maybe we can just get back to it the next day. This is not something where the power had gone out for any people or anything. There was just an alert. Something was going on at this particular power station, this kind of fenced in area that we all see driving around, where you see a lot of transformers or something, and there's a fence or barbed wire fence, but it's kind of remote. There's nobody working there, but there may be a little office or building that's locked. It's something like that. She said, no problem, I'll take care of it. So this is very important to understand regarding Julie's disappearance, because pretty much it was a last minute thing that she was even going to be out where she disappeared that day. And in fact, very, very few people knew that she was even going to be there. In fact, John Polos, who was a coworker of hers, I don't even think he knew that she was going to be doing this on her way home. So it was just a very small group of people knew that she would be there. Her supervisor who gave her the job, of course, did, and maybe some others who might have been like in the same position, because I think it was this kind of a situation where they had a meeting at the end of the day. There were a few people there, and Julie said, you know what, I can take care of this. And so she did. So she goes out there. It's on, like I said, on her way home. And she, whatever the problem was, and we're not here to get into any of the technicalities of what she was going to be doing, but whatever it was, she fixed it. So it wasn't like she got there and her disappearance happened right away. She gets out there, the fence is locked. She has to unlock the fence. She pulls her vehicle in there, and seemingly over the next hour, roughly from like 3:30 to 4:30 of that day, she took care of this problem, whatever it was. And then what happened, the way this disappearance all started, is that her husband, who lived many miles away, I think he was a painter at the time, and he has a very strong alibi, solid alibi for when she went missing, miles and miles away. Couldn't understand. She wasn't home yet. They start calling. He calls her work, and they said, I don't know. She was supposed to go out to this place. We know that she fixed it because we can see on our monitors that whatever the problem was is now fixed. We don't know what to tell you. So they sent somebody else out there. And when they went out there, they found that something certainly had gone wrong. And maybe we want to show Dr. Telesco, maybe we want to show a picture of where she was at the time, just to give the people an idea of what this location looks like right there. Now we have to remember this happened in 1987. This picture is, I think, from 2019, if not more recent, but pretty much this is the way it looked back in 1987. So you can see the barbed wire fence. You can see the fence. You need a key to unlock to drive inside. And you should know, due to what happened to Julie this day, the power company changed its procedures for people going out to remote locations. What they do now today is, if you go to a location like you're looking at in this picture, they are required to go in, unlock, of course, go inside, lock the fence behind them. And then when they're done, go back, unlock the fence, pull back out with their vehicle, and then, of course, lock the fence and leave. At the time, it was okay to just pull inside, leave the fence open. So using the procedures of today, it very well could be that Julie might not have gone missing, but they changed their procedures all because of Julie's disappearance. So what happened was when somebody showed up there to this location you're seeing in the picture there obviously had been some sort of struggle. There was her helmet, other items that she would use for her work strewn over the ground beside her work vehicle. And there were actually even drag marks in the kind of dirt, gravel that you can see in this picture. It was the same kind of terrain, no pavement, not paved or anything like that. But at the time, it was the same as you see here, where you could tell if something was dragged. You could tell that somebody, presumably Julie, was dragged away. Obviously, some sort of violence had happened there. They looked around the area, did some searches. As you can see in the background, there's kind of some trees and some woods nearby. They did some searches around the area. Maybe we want to show that satellite view just to get another idea of what it looks like, the surrounding area. There you go. That's once again a more recent picture, but I think it's very similar to the way it looked in 1987. We're looking at the location that is right near where it says West Pine Bluff Road, that area to the bottom left-hand side there. That is where the location is, right there near the intersection of West Four Mound Road and West Cooley Height Road. So that is where this all happened. So they came up, the door of Julie's truck was open. Her things, including her helmet, were on the ground. The door to the station was unlocked. So there was a little building there. It was locked, but the fence was not locked. There were drag marks away from the truck, and it was obvious that an attack occurred. And I want to remind you, though, whatever she was sent out there to do was fixed. So this is not something where she went in there and automatically something happened. Whoever did this, whether you believe it's going to be a person we're going to talk about soon, or a group of people, a stranger, whoever, this happened maybe 45 minutes after she was already on location. So the police got involved. Searches were done. Nothing was found. Neighbors were questioned. There are some houses. You can even maybe see one right there way at the bottom of the screen. It's a little more populated now in 2022, but there were still houses in the area at the time. The neighbors didn't see anything, and we're going to come back to that a little later. They weren't of much help. And Julie's husband, as I said, had a very strong alibi, and we're going to see a picture here in a moment where it's going to show how much work he did back in 1987 into the early 90s of trying to find out what happened to his wife. My impression, I've never spoken to him. John, who was the guest, once again, a coworker of Julie's, a friend of hers, has tried to talk to Julie's husband at the time. And I think the guy just never really recovered from it. And so he just does not, my impression is he just does not talk about Julie's disappearance anymore. He gave it all he could for some years. And then I think he just decided, you know what, I'm going to have to move on with my life. And I think that's what he did. I think that, he ended up getting married again. I don't know if he has any children, but we do have an article there where it shows Julie's husband's picture and documenting how much work that he did. As far as any coworkers remember, there were some people who knew she was going to be out there. It is unclear whether any of these people's alibis for after work that day were ever checked. I think they were questioned. What do you remember? Did Julie say that she was any problems with anybody? But I don't know if the police ever went down and checked, 4 or 5 coworkers' alibis to make sure that they were where they said they were after work on that day. And as I stated, she was a federal worker, so the FBI got involved. But in talking to John and interviewing John for the episode 2 years ago, they did not really do that much. This is still a case that the local sheriff's office is now responsible for Julie's disappearance if any leads come up. And that is the been that way pretty much since the beginning. So the FBI kind of took a cursory look at it. Of course, when we start talking about people who work on the power grid in the United States, especially today, we maybe start thinking it was this a terrorist attack of some type, something like that. And the FBI quickly decided this, although certainly there was a crime committed here and probably Julie is deceased, this is not something maybe that is of national security concern. So they just let the local police handle it. Now, you should know this kind of attack on a power station worker, very, very rare in the United States, despite these people doing a lot of their work on their own out in the middle of nowhere. Julie, you will find that Julie's disappearance, very rare in that respect. So nothing went on. They knew that something happened. They knew that an attack happened. The longer it went, the more you could draw the conclusion that Julie is probably deceased, unfortunately. Very sad. But really not many leads, at least what was believed in 1987 through about 2010. And everybody went on with their lives, as happens so much in disappearance. A lot of people, of course, like Julie, love Julie. The people eventually decide, just like her husband did, that, you know, they've done all they can. They're moving on. Maybe something good will happen. You know, maybe somebody will come forward, or at the very least, maybe somebody will come across or remain somewhere and everything can get jump started again. None of that happened. It was a completely cold case from just a few months after the disappearance until about 2010. And then what happened in 2010 is that John Polos, the guest who was on the episode that I did 2 years ago, got involved. As I stated very early on in this show tonight, he actually solved the disappearance the year before in 2009, where a hiker, somebody had gone missing, and there had been searches in this area. Nothing was found. And that John figured out somehow, and I don't have it in my notes, but he figured out that this guy had fallen off a cliff and gotten stuck in a tree. And so the searchers were not successful because they were looking at the base of this cliff, but nobody ever looked up. And so somebody, whether he had jumped suicide or fell, he'd fallen off a cliff, had gotten stuck in this tree and died. And then John figured out, well, probably maybe by this time his body would decay to the point that parts of it would start falling out of the tree. And John was right. And they ended up solving this disappearance because of something that came to John's mind. And he was never took an interest in disappearances or anything ever before in his life. But because he got confidence from that, he said, you know what, Julie's disappearance, I'm going to start looking into it. And that's exactly what he did. Now, we don't have time to go through everything that John did, but surely as an amateur investigator, he did more than any other amateur investigator that I've ever talked to regarding any disappearance out there. So I give John a lot of credit. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with some of the conclusions that he's come to. That's always up for the listeners. Don't try to steer anybody in a particular direction, but we need more people like John Polos. And this is a guy who is not young. He was, of course, in the workforce in 1987, and I think he's like 75 now or something. So when he got involved, he was already well into his 60s for Julie's case. It's fascinating, fascinating guy. And so no crimes were like it anywhere else, seemingly. But of note, during that time, there was a guy, his name is Will Parks. And as we will show in a map later, we don't have to do it right now. He got some attention. He had some problems with the same exact sheriff's office that it was responsible for Julie's disappearance, but it had nothing to do with her disappearance. It had something to do with something else. And he successfully sued the local sheriff's office for defamation, something like that. And he got some sort of payoff. And everybody in the area knew it. But so that was really the only thing of note in that area that happened. So 2010 rolls around. John Polos gets involved. And one of the first things they did was go out to that area that we showed in the previous on the previous picture where Julie disappeared, and they camped out there, and they started counting cars of how often a car went by this location where Julie disappeared. And I think they figured out that on average, a car would go by every minute and a half. Now, this is in 2011 or 2012, not in 1987. But from that, they could deduce kind of that if somebody attacked Julie, that it must have happened very quickly. If cars are going by here roughly, let's even just say 2 minutes, and nobody saw anything, no driver saw anything, then it had to have happened very quickly, which to them, I think kind of meant this is somebody who is very, very calculating. You can take that for what it's worth, but that's the kind of study that they did. They also took flyers to all of the surrounding residents. I think they ended up getting 50 or 60, 70 flyers to all the close houses within a couple miles. And it wasn't so much a flyer, but a questionnaire asking them certain things about, did they live there at the time in 1987? And Julie Weflin is still missing. And if you had to point the finger at somebody, if any suspicious characters in this area, could you write that person's name down? And it was a questionnaire, and they got quite a few of them back, surprisingly. It's something that I've never heard of in any other disappearance that I've covered. And in that, I just mentioned Will Parks. Will Parks's name was the person that was mentioned the most by a long ways. And he, of course, he did live in that area, and we'll show that map in a little bit. So this kind of caught John Polos's attention, this Will Parks guy. But John never did talk to him. Why? Because Will Parks had a reputation for being kind of an isolationist. He already had problems with the sheriff's office. He had won his lawsuit, kind of an ornery type. And pretty much it sounds like everybody who lived in that area stayed away from Will Parks. Well, that was enough. And maybe we want to show that picture right now, Dr. Telesco, of Will Parks. Now, the reason this is important is that there he is, Will Parks. He was a business owner in the area, a well-respected business owner, despite what his neighbors thought. He ran kind of a place where he went team building, one of these places, kind of you could go hiking and all these outdoor games and everything. And businesses would send their employees to this place so they could get to know each other, team building activities, getting to know each other, how to work as a team. And Will Parks had done this for a long time, was well respected. And in fact, at the time, I even looked up to see what his Yelp rating or Google rating was for his business. It was very high, not perfect, but certainly good. And so whatever business he was doing, people seemed to like what he was doing there. Well, in John finding out about Will Parks, started asking around, started talking to Julie's family. Her father and mother were still alive at that time in like 2011, 2012. And wouldn't you know that in a diary that Julie's mother has or had, she showed John Polos that at some point before Julie went missing, Julie was talking to her mother, and mentioned Will Parks, if you can believe it. And she said that she was having some sort of problem with him. John looked into this further, and it is believed, although John's still working this even on this in 2022, is that Will Parks and Julie Weflin did know each other, and that they were in some sort of adventure group together. And allegedly, once this is something that John's still trying to find out, we know how rumors can be in disappearances. Allegedly, Julie got Will Parks kicked out of this adventure, some sort of hiking group or something, because he was kind of stalking her. Allegedly. It's not been confirmed, but this is something that John's been working on. And unfortunately, this adventure group, which still exists to this day, has not been very helpful in trying to help John out. They will not give out any records of who was in the group back in 1987. Nothing. They've not been helpful to John's investigation at all. Why? Hard to say. So in that diary, John saw, it was, once again, it wasn't Julie's diary, it was her mother's. He saw that Will Parks was in there. Now, the problem is that sometime between 2011, 2012, where John saw this diary at the mother's house and more to the present, coming up to like 2020, she threw the diary out. Why? I don't know. So I've never gotten to see it. Unfortunately, John didn't take any pictures of that page saying this. All we know is that something stuck with her mother, Julie's mother, that she felt the need to write this in her diary about a Will Parks. So we now move on to this. So there's that. That's what then put Will Parks on John Polis's radar. But should be clear, there were other guys that John was looking at. He was not the only person. Will was not the only person that these neighbors said, could be involved. Well, the next thing that popped up after John got involved, if you can believe this, is that they discovered Julie went missing in 1987. It was discovered in 2011. So 11 and 13, 24 years later, that her personal locker at her work at the Bonneville Power Company was never searched. It was still locked 24 years later. Just nobody felt the need to. It just, once again, the listeners and viewers here need to understand how people move on. It's just, this is just a part of, and there we go. There it was there. Grace, thank you. This just shows you how people will quickly move on from disappearances. It's very sad. But their work locker never searched. So it was opened. Once again, how it came to be, maybe it's in the article itself. I didn't write it in my notes. But this is nothing, it seems, in it was of any note. If it was, the public doesn't know. John Polos, who's been working on this, doesn't know either. But this is a very good illustration of how things can go in disappearance. A disappearance that got a lot of attention at the time, and then things slip through the cracks. Now, John, in continuing to do his work after this crazy news came out, found a witness who said that he actually saw Julie arguing with somebody the day that Julie disappeared. But he says, this witness says, that the police never talked to him, and he didn't really stick to too much to him, because he claimed that Julie and whoever this guy was seemed to know each other because they were calling each other by their own names. Unfortunately, this guy could not remember the name that Julie was saying. And of course, the listeners and viewers of Unfound know how I feel about witnesses who don't come around until years and years later. You will have to judge that for yourself. But John, who's been working on this, takes this witness very seriously. Now, why also is Will Parks considered to be a suspect? Well, there's another disappearance, Deborah Swanson. And I think we have her picture here, but I think maybe I sent it, maybe I didn't. But John is also looking at the possibility, there she is, thank you, that her disappearance the year before in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, could be connected also to Julie's disappearance. I've had a chance to talk to Deborah's sister a few years back, and she claims that Deborah knew Will Parks. And in fact, Deborah had gone to a party not long before she went missing, in which Will Parks was there, allegedly. So in her case, just to go through the facts very quickly, she went to a park in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is not far from Spokane. I think it's just across the river or something. And she went to a park for a jog. This is something she usually did. And she disappeared. Her car was later found in the parking lot where she always put it when she went for these runs in this park. Never seen again. March 29th, 1986. So it is alleged that Will Parks knew both of these women. Deborah Swanson disappeared in 1986, then Julie Weflin, who disappeared in 1987. So I knew about all of this. I talked to John about this way back in 2017. I wanted him to come on the podcast way back then. He wouldn't because, once again, Will Parks, very litigious person, very protective of his reputation, his business reputation, did not want him talking about anything, talked about him for anything, let alone Julie's disappearance. Will Parks died in early 2020. He was driving. He was eating and driving at the same time. He choked on something and wrecked, got killed. And it was at that point John said, yes, I will now come on your podcast now that Will Parks is deceased, because then John can't be sued, just to be honest. So John came on. We did this fantastic interview that I hope all of you will check out. So Will Parks is considered to be, at least in John's mind, the number one suspect. Now, if we could put up the picture, Dr. Telesco, of the distance between where Julie went missing and there it is right there. Thank you. So at the bottom of the screen in that red dot, that is where Julie went missing. And 13620 North Redfern Lane is where Will Parks lived. You can see by driving 4.5 miles, 8 minutes. The tough part to understand, though, is, are we to believe this was just a coincidence? He just happened to be driving by and knew Julie, just happened to see her there and decide to attack her, have an argument with her or something. That is the only way it could have happened, because once again, nobody but people who worked with Julie knew she was going to be there that day. So that brings us to the points, these points of learning for this show tonight. Number one, the problem of coincidence. The problem is it's always a factor in any crime that is unsolved. Was something planned, or did it just happen to happen? As humans, we usually dismiss coincidences. I know that I do. And that's why when it comes to Will Parks being involved in Julie's disappearance, I have to admit I'm a bit leery. It's up for you to decide. We believe that most of the time things involving crime are planned. And how many times have you heard that can't be a coincidence? It's just part of it's almost become a cliche in our everyday lives. The truth is, very few disappearances I've covered do I believe they were the result of a coincidence. Very, very few. The solved ones that have been solved, that Unfound is covered, planned or accidents, just like a domestic violence that went that one step further. Then what is the problem? Coincidence is a part of our lives. We can't automatically rule it out because we know coincidence is part of our lives. For example, I remember back in 1998, I was at the Las Vegas airport. That's where I lived. I lived in Las Vegas, and out of nowhere, I happened to run into one of my best friends from college who happened to be at the same airport at the same time that I was. 1990. I hadn't seen him for like 5 years. There he was. There I was. Coincidence. So we know that they happen. So it can never be ruled out. However, if Will Parks did it, a coincidence, why? No way he waits until Julie is done with her work to attack her, right? And if he followed her there somehow, let's say he was stalking her and was waiting at her work, then why would he really let her get this job done before attacking her? Would he really wait 45 minutes? Hard to understand. The only way it could have happened is if he drove by, just happened to drive by and see her. Number two, when it's obvious. This is also something that everybody needs to understand. In the disappearance world, obviously in the murder world, we have a body, we have blood, we might even have a murder weapon. It's obvious what happened. In disappearances, it's rare that we have any sorts of signs that something violent happened. Very, very, very rare. I just cannot stress this enough. Julie's in that way is unique. And in fact, I went through all of Unfound's 256 disappearances now. I could pick out 3 where it's obvious that something violent happened. That would be Linda K. Carroll, that happened up in the Panhandle of Florida in the 1980s too, as I remember. Jody Huisentruit, a very well-known disappearance from Mason City, Iowa. She was attacked. All of her things were strewn all over the parking lot of her apartment complex. And Kimberly Raymer, she was at her father's place. She was home alone. Somebody obviously broke into the house and things were altered. I think pictures were down off the wall. Something obviously violent had happened inside her father's house. That's it. So we have to look at Julie's disappearance, seeing that things strewn all over the parking lot there, the little area beside her work truck in that fenced in area. Very, very rare when it comes to disappearances. Because disappearances are usually committed in places that are controlled, people's homes, for example, domestic violence situations. So people have time to clean everything up or put things back the way they should. And why is it, obvious is because the attacker had no choice. Whoever did this to Julie, it seems had no choice. They were there. That person was there. That group of people were there. She was there. And that the people decided that Julie needed to be attacked and drug away. And then number 3, people can't help themselves. And this goes to some of these people that John Poulos has talked to, these witnesses. I'm not here to degrade his work. I think, John, that anybody is taking an interest in a disappearance 35 years later is fantastic. All I've tried to do with him is try to give him some insights, some pointers, and maybe be a little more cynical when people, tell you things. And because people can be very convincing, even though they're lying, even though they didn't have anything to do with a disappearance, they can still be very convincing and be lying. We have to remember that. Very common. People want to be helpful. They feel horrible about Julie going missing, but they don't know anything, but they feel like they want to be helpful. And so they will say things that are untrue. It's very common in disappearances. And in fact, this Friday's episode of Unfound, I talk a little bit about that very topic. The subconscious is a powerful tool. The neighbors pointing at Will Parks seems like, oh man, that is the light bulb. The light bulb's going off. That is the key that's going to solve this. The problem, we can't forget that Will Parks' name was all over the papers in 1999 for something that had nothing to do with Julie's disappearance. And so in the subconscious, this could make people think, well, yeah, there was that guy who had the problem with the police. Well, I'll just write his name down. Maybe he had something to do with it. Simply because, so it's not people independently coming to the conclusion that Will Parks is a good suspect. The fact is they're all thinking the same thing. I remember this article from years ago in which he seemed like kind of a shady guy, and maybe these people had personal problems with him as well. They said he was weird, he's strange, he lives on a compound. And so it's kind of, I don't know if you want to call it confirmation bias, but these people who answered this questionnaire from John might have not come to it in an independent manner. Very important in disappearances. Comes up all the time. The question is, if they had never heard of Will Parks, had his name hadn't been in the papers, would they have named him? That's the thing you have to think about. Moreover, if he was their type of person, let's say they were having community get-togethers and he was, come block party and he would show up and he'd bring the beer and everything, would they still have named him? Or is this kind of a, kind of a bullying on these neighbors' parts because they think he's strange and everything? Are they going to name him? It's something you always have to consider. So I think what I'm saying is their answer of Will Parks in this questionnaire, these questionnaires, is not as solid as everybody thinks. So the discussion, maybe we, that's it. As far as my part, reading all of my notes and going through, like I said, John did so much. There's no way we could include it here in an hour, all of the work that he's done. But those are the generalities, the most important facts of the disappearance of Julie Weflin. And in addition, we talked a little bit about the disappearance of Deborah Swanson. And now you're seeing there's, for example, that picture right there, you have up there, Dr. Telesco, Julie's husband, And you can see Mike Weflin has given up work to search for his wife, Julie, who disappeared in September. He was just as dogged a husband as I've ever heard in a disappearance. And I think that eventually he just burned himself out. Very sad. Very sad. So Dr. Telesco, if you're ready, let's talk.
Let's talk. So one of the things that you said earlier, which I forgot to mention in the intro, is how you give voice to those who have no voice. And I forgot to mention that I usually do in my intro of you. And it's one of the things that I really admire and honor your work,
Thank you.
Because I'm very much into victimology. I'm very much into the families of victims, etc. And I think that your work and what you do empowers families. It empowers those who love this victim, who they're not even sure if they're dead, and they may be. If the body is found, if remains are found, then there's confirmation on that. But otherwise, it's like something we call in psychology complicated grief.
Yeah.
And so after all of these years of the person still being missing and no leads or anything, and then you look at how in the world is her work locker not searched? This boggles my mind. I don't understand how that could be.
It's one of the most bizarre facts that I've discovered or been told in many years of doing this podcast, 256 disappearances. I've covered a lot of bizarre facts. That's one of the bizarre ones.
Yeah. Also bizarre is that this suspect, possibly person who's emerging as a possible suspect, choked on a sandwich while he was driving. And I don't know if he is the perpetrator, then, that's some karma. That's some good karma there.
Yeah. The way that all happened is that, like I said, I had been trying to get John on the podcast, but he would not come on. He was really afraid of Will Parks, never went to talk to Will Parks. And if he talks about those reasons in the episode, you can hear him talk about it for himself. It's probably not what I would have done, being that if I lived in the area and was working on this independently, I think I would at least give it a shot. But if you think the guy is a murderer, maybe you start thinking, well, maybe he's going to murder me too. But what happened was that Will Parks died, and it's not like I'm keeping tabs on him. And it was a few months. And I just started thinking, I hadn't talked to John and Polis in a while. And I'd been thinking about Julie's disappearance for a while. So I started saying, is anything going on? And the first thing I saw was John posted on some forum somewhere that Will Parks died. And I called John, I think within like 5 minutes, because I knew the reason he wasn't coming on the podcast in the first place was because Will Parks was still alive. Will Parks dies. I called John in 5 minutes as soon as I found out. And that's how the episode happened. So
I want to bring on some, we have two of our students. One is Michaela and the other is Keldon. Keldon is a PhD student. Michaela is an undergrad.
Wow.
And I'm wondering if Keldon, I know Michaela actually is present on the Zoom.
Yeah.
So if she'd like to join in, and if she has any questions, I'd love to hear, what she has to say. She's not a CJ major, but here's the thing. And I did put in the chat, like a bunch of our course offerings that we have at the undergrad level, the master's level. And I didn't put in the PhD, but we do have a PhD in criminal justice. But I know that even though Michaela's not involved in criminal justice, she's like typical civilian, typical person who is fascinated by these things and fascinated by, the inner workings of missing persons cases, as well as investigations. And how do you go about, getting to the bottom of this when you have very little to go with and you have a lot of circumstantial
we need
evidence.
those people. That's spectacular. We need
right.
Those
So go ahead, Michaela, tell us what you're thinking and ask any questions you might have of Ed about this case.
I just wanted to say I love coming on the podcast and coming down to Fort Lauderdale to talk with us in person. Obviously in person things are better, but everything
Yeah.
happens for a reason.
Yeah.
With one of the questions that I had was, is there a specific reason that you believe that Julie went missing? I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but is there a specific reason you believe that she went missing?
Once again, this is my experience. And as I talked about in one of these learning points, I don't particularly like coincidences. In looking through all of the disappearances that Unfound has covered, once again, 2 or 3 of them maybe were coincidences. All the other ones are people, women who went missing because of their husbands killed them or situations like that. Okay. We can get on, and I talk about those different types when I do my presentations, like I did last year at Nova Southeastern. So I don't like coincidences. So then I have to start thinking about, well, what wouldn't be a coincidence? What would be something then would lead somebody to that place on that particular time, on that particular day, going after Julie Weflin? And what I would say is that my first choice would be a coworker. That would be my first choice, because there would be somebody there. He would hear that Julie's going to this remote area to do this work. He's getting off work. She's getting off work. As everybody saw here, she's an attractive young woman, 28 years old, probably one of the few women working amongst many men. And he thinks, well, maybe I'll go over there and, make the moves, or I know she's married. This, to me, is a much more common scenario in disappearances as a whole than somebody just happening to drive by and this person having a grudge against that somebody. That person turns around, pulls in there, to attack a woman. The scenario of a coworker causing the disappearance of somebody, another coworker, employee causing the disappearance of another employee, is much more common than somebody happening to drive down the street and run into somebody. That's the way I think.
Great. Any other questions, Michaela?
I just thought of one whilst you were talking.
Sure,
so
please.
Is it more women who go missing, or is it like an equal amount of men and women?
I've not done the recent count. I would think that Unfound has, I haven't broken it down recently for male and female. But if you look at NamUs, which is the federal government website where it has a database, it's surely not a complete database, but you certainly can learn a lot about disappearances there. I think, there's certainly more of one missing than the other. And unfortunately, I off the top of my head, there's certainly more women missing than men missing on there, or more men missing than women. There's certainly a big difference there. However, I think in Unfound World, it's pretty close to 50-50.
Okay.
It's pretty close. We'll go have weeks in a row. We'll cover nothing but women. And then we'll have weeks where, 2 months, we're covering nothing but men. And in the end, it's really close. And I just talk to whoever wants to talk.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Michaela.
Yep.
Thank you. Awesome. And thank you for all your behind the scenes work that you're doing for me.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. I just put the NamUs website in the chat for those who are interested and might want to pursue that.
Yes.
I do have a couple of people who have said some really interesting things that I want to just read them out loud for you.
Yes.
And I wanted to give Keldon a chance. He's one of our students. I know he's here, but he's not here in the Zoom platform. He's on YouTube, and see if he has any questions that he would like to ask. But here's Kathy. Kathy is saying she thinks a coworker, like you were saying, is responsible because there's no place to park covertly at that substation. It was away from the corner. A personal vehicle parked on the roads would have been seen. But Twinkle then asks, was the substation in clear view from the road?
Yeah, it's right there. As that view, that picture that we have there from Street View is one that I put up on Google Maps or Google Street View and snipped it. So it would just show that it's very close. It's within, 30 feet of the road, and there are no trees there. I think that's the way it looks there is the way it's always been. There weren't any trees covering anything. And so of course you can see right through a chain link fence.
Yeah.
There's really nowhere to hide. And, if there was a fight there between two people, even if, it was some very quick attack, you'd think somebody would have seen something. It would have had to have happened very, very quickly. And it very well may be John, came up with the idea that maybe Julie didn't even see this person coming. Of course, that would fly in the face of what this, witness said, that he saw Julie arguing with somebody, but maybe Julie was surprised. She came out and, there's a car parked there on the side of the road. She doesn't know what to think of it. And then all of a sudden somebody comes up behind her and hits her over the head. Certainly possible. That would be quick. I don't know if there's any facts to support that though.
Yeah. So, Kathy says, in responding, I think, to this issue, she says it was set back from the corner of Four Mound and Cooley Height, but you can see the gravel and small substation building. Kathy also says, I don't think this disappearance involved any coincidences. Tony Crawford says, I'm curious if her relation to her coworkers was ever interviewed and investigated.
All I can tell you is what John said. I think she was well respected. She was liked. I don't know. John didn't technically have the same job that she did. He would run into her once in a while. He was not. I don't think John was one of these people who was out in the field. I think might have been in administration or management or something like that. I think of course, he was much older than Julie, even at the time in 1987. So maybe he'd worked his way up into some management position. Great for him. But I don't know. I don't think he was unclear. Did Julie happen to work with a particular coworker all the time? Like, going back to your NYPD days, did you always get put with the same officer if you're cruising around together? I don't know what was going on there.
Yeah.
But as far as John knows, she was well respected and liked, but maybe she was respected and liked a little too much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I mean, in response to your question about like working with a partner in the beginning, I think if you're new, you might get pushed around a lot. But I think the more you get tenure in the department or the agency, wherever you're working, then you get to kind of select who you want to work with, and they'll pair you with the same person. But
yeah,
I'm not sure if. I mean, I'm still hooked on the Will Parks thing. What makes you think that it's not Will Parks and that it's?
Excuse me?
Else? What makes you think that it's someone other than Will?
Well, we would have to put together a scenario where Will Parks just happened to drive by at the time. There's no denying that he lived in the area, but it's not close. It's not a half mile away. It's 4.5 miles away, which is not close. There's certainly people who lived closer to that power station than he did. So we have to just put this in the context of what do we mean by close? It's important. In addition, if we were to believe that he just happened to be on that road that day, that he would see the power vehicle there. If he knew Julie, then he certainly knows that she works for the power company. But would that translate to, I wonder if Julie Weflin is working there today? And even if he came back around, what are the odds that at that very precise point of time between her finishing the job and her getting in the vehicle is when this attack occurred? How did Will Parks in particular time it so well?
Yeah,
because there would only be a couple minutes. She would finish the work and okay, it's done. And as I keep saying, she completed that job and it took her like 45 minutes. Did he wait around? It doesn't seem conceivable, maybe, but that's just not the first choice that I would make. Even though a disappearance that I mentioned earlier, Jody Husentruth, that's certainly what happened. She was late for work the morning she was going to be a host of a morning show, a TV show in Mason City, Iowa. She was like an hour late, and it is now clear, it was very clear early on, that somebody waited for her. Even though she was late coming out of her apartment, somebody waited in the parking lot for her until she came out and attacked her. So it happens, but it's rare. Yeah. It's so rare. And just once again, getting that timing just right.
Yeah.
That she's done with but how many, 2 minutes between finishing the job and getting in her vehicle, and he just happened to show up at that time. It would lead me to believe that maybe somebody else was there. A coworker pulls up, is being friendly, hanging out, doing whatever, and then tries something on her and things don't go the way this guy wants. Or maybe he wanted to kill her all along. I don't, that seems more logical.
That definitely seems like it's more possible.
Yeah.
I mean, anything is possible, but
yeah.
probably it is,
Mhm.
especially for that remote spot.
Right. And
So-
something I should also say about the diary that John saw, and I think John has told the truth from day one in all his work that he's done with Julie's case. He's a very reputable, very good guy. He retired from the power company. He's like 75 years old and he's still a high school teacher, really into education, really, but, educating young people. Good guy. The problem I have, like with the diary of, her mother writing that in the diary, is the diary wasn't seen until like 2011. How do we know that she didn't write that in the diary until years later? And just because somebody threw some rumor out there, we don't. In addition, if the diary was so important to the disappearance, how did her mom, I don't like criticizing people, but we're all about solutions here. How does the mother throw that away or lose it or whatever? That should have been like locked in a safety deposit box, because it has Will Parks's name in it, but that's not what happened. So then I start thinking, is it real? I believe what John saw. I believe him. But did the mother write it in really because Julie said that, or was that something that didn't happen until years later and she's just saying that? And unfortunately, family members, when they get desperate, as I've learned, they will say things maybe that aren't true, that are exaggerations and things, all because, trying to push things in what they believe is the right direction. This is very common.
Well, I mean, another thing that we always say is like, I believe that you believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that you do believe that.
Yes.
But, it's like 5 people could be watching a car accident. And then when you're a police officer, you come upon the scene, you start taking the report and asking people for what happened. And you're going to get 5 different accounts of what happened right before their very eyes. So a human being's perception and perspective can be skewed by a lot of things. Bias, like you said before, confirmation bias, all that. I really believe that this is the guy, and now I'm gonna put all of the chess pieces in such a way that it's gonna come out that way. That's what my hypothesis was.
Right. And you should know, even though Will Parks died over 2 years ago, they haven't been able to get on his property yet. There's not enough evidence to serve a warrant to look at his property.
Right.
I think it's certainly worthwhile.
You can understand from a legal perspective why this does not raise to the level of proof required, which is probable cause. Yeah. So, it may look like a duck, sound like a duck, smell like a duck, but it's not going to raise to that level of proof that's required, that legal standard that we need in order to secure a search warrant.
Mm-hmm. And even though I don't think that's not my first choice, Will Parks, but certainly I can understand if John wants to keep working toward, or the sheriff's office wants to keep working toward getting a warrant for however they're going to do it legally to search that property, I'm absolutely for it. Absolutely. I don't mind being wrong.
Right.
But to me, I can also understand why they've never been able to get, permission to go onto that property. I just don't think there's enough evidence to think that Will Parks is involved. Even in the other issue is that John was also trying to connect another woman to Will Parks, and her name was Catherine Gregory, who went missing. I believe it was in Spokane earlier in the 1980s. And John was thinking, and now it's clear. And we talked about it during the episode 2 years ago, but now in the present, after I've had a chance to look at it, it's clear to me that her husband did something to her. It's fairly obvious. So already we're taking one of those women kind of off the list that Will Parks, a disappearance that he could have been involved in. And then when it goes to Deborah Swanson, what happened? Did he, attack her? How did he take her out of the park without anybody noticing? Did he carry her? Did he have a gun? How was it that he, got her out of the park without anybody seeing, right there in downtown Coeur d'Alene, and her car is still there and there's only one parking lot, all these things? It starts to get very complicated to think that Will Parks did that too. Not impossible, but you still have to start thinking about the actual logistics of this, and it starts to get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah. Great stuff. So I'm going to let you plug yours, then I'll plug mine shamelessly.
Okay.
And, go ahead.
Great. Unfound can be found on Facebook, on Instagram. We have a great YouTube channel. We just Twitter. We just recently also are on TikTok, where I post kind of a preview of that Friday's episode. That's how I'm using TikTok. We just got onto it within the last month.
I just watched that.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's what I'm doing. Excellent. It's about a minute and a half each of those videos. And this Friday, we're covering the disappearance of Justin Gaines. It's a very common type of disappearance where a young man goes to a club, leaves the club, never to be seen again. But what's unique about Justin's is actually somebody was charged with knowing information regarding his disappearance, but for some reason, those charges were dropped. Justin Gaines, he disappeared from Duluth, Georgia in 2007. His mother is the guest. So those are,
Wow.
and we moved, I should also mention, we've moved our live show from Wednesdays back to Mondays. So maybe some of your viewers here tonight would like to take part 9 p.m. Eastern on Monday nights on our YouTube channel.
Yes. Awesome. And I would like to encourage anybody who's watching us now live, who's not a subscriber to your YouTube channel, to do so. And any of our students who are going to watch this later on, any of our faculty or staff, or just civilians who happen to go on our YouTube channel and they watch this, it really, really important that that we kind of have this beautiful cooperative relationship, this collegial relationship, Ed and I. And so you guys subscribe to us and we'll subscribe to you. And we'll follow each other and we'll watch each other's stuff. And that's how we're all about education. The Fischler College of Education, School of Criminal Justice, it's all about that. Educating the community, educating ourselves, educating our students, of course. And shameless plug, we do have some course offerings that might tickle your fancy and tickle some of your fan base's fancy. We have a bachelor's degree, of course, in criminal justice with some really cool course offerings like policing, interview, interrogation, and report writing, criminal investigations, victimology, the CSI effect, the media and crime, psychology of criminal behavior, and forensic psychology. All of those things are fascinating, right? Fascinating. If you're fascinated already with stuff like missing persons and cold cases. Our master's in CJ has an investigative forensic technology, investigative processes, criminal evidence, and a concentration. This I think is very cool. A concentration in forensic technology. And that includes something like forensic analysis of trace and drug evidence, firearms, fingerprints, and other impression evidence, crime scene, and DNA technology. So if you're interested, this is the place that you might want to land on. We'll see. But definitely subscribe.
Dr. Telesco, would you allow me to put in a plug can I put in a plug for your school as well? I'm going to just tell anybody, having been there to the campus last November, beautiful campus. I wish I would have gone to school at Nova Southeastern University. If I was 18, that's where I would be going. I went to a great school, Grove City College, but that's where I would be going. Fort Lauderdale, beautiful weather, beautiful campus, great professors like Dr. Telesco. I enjoyed going there. Very inquisitive students when I was there. If you have a daughter or son that thinks about going to college, they should consider Nova Southeastern University.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Thank you so much. And I just again applaud all of the work that you do. I love working with you. We'll talk offline about like when we're doing. I know we're skipping July.
Yeah.
But I think we're gonna be planning something for August.
Great.
Let's definitely do that.
Yes. Yes.
And for those of you who are in town in Fort Lauderdale, September 22nd, that's going to be open to the public too. So if you are interested, that's going to be at 11 o'clock and it's going to be in the Value Integration Suite. So we'll post more of it on our Facebook pages and social media, et cetera, and mark it. Ed's coming down to Fort Lauderdale. But if you're in the area, totally come. And
Yeah,
then you
I'll
could
be
meet him
pushing it.
in
I'll be
person.
trying to get some of my listeners to show up for sure.
That'd be great. All right. So that's all I have for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again, Michaela, and all of our
Mhm.
students and all of our viewers. And again, thank you to our dean, of course, Dean Durham.